I want to, the American Revolution, it's a new series. It comes out next month.
It comes out in November 16th. And I've been working on it when it comes out, it'll be 9 years and 11 months. I started it. I said yes to it when Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency. And, Mark Twain says history doesn't repeat itself. He's absolutely right. No event has happened twice. But the Bible, Old Testament, says there's nothing new under the sun, meaning human nature doesn't change. So Mark Twain is supposed to have said history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So I've never worked on a film in which it wasn't rhyming in the present moment. And so The Revolution is just another one of these extraordinary stories, our origin story, which we've lost touch with.
I think there's no doubt about it.
It's at arm's length because there are no photographs, there's no newsreels. They're in buckled shoes, they got hose, they got breeches, they got waistcoats, they got powdered wigs, and somehow we don't want to fuss with the great ideas. And the great ideas are the greatest ideas ever. I actually think the American Revolution is the most important event since the birth of Christ.
I heard you say that.
I really, really firmly believe that, because if you think about it, up until that moment, everybody was under an authoritarian rule. They were subjects. They were superstitious peasants. And we created citizens. And that's a big deal. When we say we hold these truths to be self-evident, there was nothing self-evident about what Jefferson was about to say, that all men are created equal. No one on earth had made that proposition,
Really?
that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Let's go.
That is not stuff that the world had ever really heard. He had distilled a century of Enlightenment thinking. He'd been goaded on by what was happening in the breakdown of relationships with the British over stuff, and what became a quarrel between Englishmen suddenly got broken out into natural rights. Like, this is what we all not only deserve, but the world needs to change. And it did from that moment on.
And that was Jefferson?
And that's Jefferson distilling it, but it's the sensibility of everybody. The other thing is that it's a process thing. It's like democracy isn't something that it's a thing, it's a process, it's something you do. So when it says pursuit of happiness, the key is, we can get to happiness in a second, but the key is pursuit. It's like, after a more perfect union, as the Constitution says. The pursuit means it's a process. You're never getting there. And happiness did not mean the acquisition of things in a marketplace of objects, but lifelong learning, so that you would be virtuous enough, they borrowed from the classical traditions, to earn the right of citizenship. And everybody talked, you hear it as we're working on that virtue, virtue, virtue. It's all about character. It's all about the idea that character is destiny. John Adams is petrified that there's too much ambition and avarice, too much lust for profit, that we won't be virtuous enough to sustain this republic. It's so interesting because they're all the ideas that we wrestle with today,
So the Declaration is kind of like a love letter to the future in a way.
Oh God, my God, that's the best expression I've ever heard. That's exactly what it is.
Interesting.
Thomas Paine, an Englishman who came off the boat in Philadelphia, failure in everything, and he contracted dysentery or typhus on the way, and he writes this pamphlet that's published in early January of 1776. At that point, the war has already started at Lexington and Concord the previous April, but nobody's really sure what we're going to do with this rebellion. And certainly independency, as they called it, is not on the mind of everybody. But he writes this thing called Common Sense. It's this pamphlet, the most important pamphlet in American history, and just comes out and says the king is an ass.
And who's this, Thomas Paine?
Yeah, Thomas Paine, And he then says, not since the time of Noah, what happened with Noah, do we have a chance to remake the world. And that's the American Revolution. It's suddenly, you're no longer quarreling over Native American land or taxes or representation. You're actually into the biggest idea that human beings have suggested, that we could actually govern ourselves. No, that had never happened before. Wow. And that we could sustain, and we then these ideas sponsor revolutions for the next 200 plus years. And, we've been going along for 249 years, pretty well, thank you.
And we're in it. Thank you very much. That's a great answer.
I love the love letter to the future, though, man. I'm not going to forget that. That's a great gift you gave me today. Thank you.
Oh, man.
That's what it is, because it's all about
you said it's the pursuit of happiness, right?
That's
it's like,
right.
Sometimes even now you're challenging the way that I've thought about some of this, because it's like, the documentary does this, and I think it's 8 parts. I'm not sure.
Six parts, 12 hours.
I haven't watched all of it, but it challenges you to think about that. It's like, you're not just here to just be here, right? No. You're not just here like you got this Willy Wonka ticket, like to be in a citizen or a part of a society. It's something that is alive and that's evolving, and you need to constantly put it under the microscope.
That's correct.
And you need to put you under the microscope, right?
That's right.
We don't have a relationship with ourselves. That's one thing I think a lot of people don't have a relationship with themselves anymore. And so I think when you're not sitting there and thinking and contemplating where you're at and how the world's affecting you and how you can affect the world, I think it starts to limit us to just looking at our Declaration of Independence almost just as like a receipt of times instead of as a living document, or more of like a living will and testament.
I don't know how it could be said any better than that. I think we wear too many things instead of be too many things. We wear our faith and use it as a cudgel. If there's one thing I learned about making films about the U.S. and us, is that there's only us. There's no them. And people are always creating a them to make an enemy in order to postpone the active work that I have to do, that self-investigation. And that's, interestingly enough, that self-reflective sense that I need to improve. Mark Twain once said, nothing so needs improving as other people's habits. Like, we're always ready to say how, man, you should do this differently, you should do that differently, but we're not willing to, I have an ancestor, the Scottish poet Robert Burns, who said, "Oh, would some power the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us." And I think that this whole work of not just wearing your ideas like a piece of clothing, of fashion, but absorbing them and living it is the big dynamic. So everybody, it is in the interest of an authoritarian to have everybody be a kind of superstitious peasant, right? Uneducated, not improving, not in pursuit of happiness and lifelong learning, which is what they all meant.
That's where they want us. That's where the rulers want you there.
They want you in a place where you're passive, where you're distracted by your things and your whatever and this scandal and stuff like that. Eleanor Roosevelt once said that great people discuss ideas, average people discuss events, and small minds discuss other people, and you realize the extent to which our whole culture is based on kind of judgment, not of ourselves, not with the self-reflective scrutiny that all of our religious teachings, all of our philosophy, and all of the common sense of negotiating this complicated thing that we call our lives suggest, but abandoning that in favor of I can tell you what you're doing, and I can tell you what he's doing wrong. But oh no, I'm fine here. I believe
it's nice. It's nice to because it's fucking painful to look at yourself.
That is,
and I think it's painful, or I don't know if it's painful. It was inventive of these guys at the time.
Even when the French decide to come in after the Battle of Saratoga, it's still not a given that we're going to win. Washington isn't totally sure that we're going to win. And when Charleston falls in the spring of 1780, it's like, I think the game is over. I'm not sure how we can continue. And he does. And then the French, we have a few engagements. The first couple of engagements with the French are disasters. And we're thinking maybe their help isn't going to be helpful. And then their army comes and they march with Washington, not to New York to liberate it, but around and down. And they trap Cornwallis, and the French Navy defeats the British and allows the big guns to come in from New. It is as riveting a story as you could ever tell. And it's our story and nobody knows it. It's our origin story. It's our origin mythology. It's our Valhalla. It's our Thor and Odin. These are all the founding stuff. And what could be more important, and particularly today when we feel like we're divided, so divided, well, you go, well, we're pretty divided back then, and we were pretty divided during the Vietnam. We were really divided during the Great Depression, and we were really, in America first, and we were really divided during the Civil War. So maybe we're always divided, and maybe the essence is not to just keep pointing and escalating it, but say, what do we share in common? Well, I'll tell you what we share in common. We share an origin story that on July 4th in 1776, very few countries know exactly when they were born, where, Philadelphia, when, July 4th, 1776, and what we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's our story.
What's our zodiac sign?
Yeah, so we are Cancer. That's our zodiac sign. Yeah, July 4th. Although I read an article the other day that suggests that actually these borders of the signs might be shifting. So now I'm gonna put an asterisk next.
Okay.
To it. So,
yeah. So America's a Cancer.
Cancer with an asterisk.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. Cancer is characterized as highly emotional, imaginative, and loyal.
There you go.
That's pretty American.
So maybe we ought to work on those things. Tenacious, sympathetic, creative, protective. That's pretty good.
Weaknesses are moodiness, insecurity, pessimism, and being easily hurt.
So there's
we're here.
So this is us, right? This is the U.S. This is us.
This
right?
is us. People get an idea of what a culture is, right?
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, Britain was predominantly white, probably, I would guess, until they took in slaves and Native Americans. I'm not sure.
Well, there was not a...
Or Caucasian, I guess they would have called it at the time, or European?
They were European, but they're also a mixture of lots of European cultures, and their whole worldwide economy was dependent on slavery, mostly in the Caribbean, as the Spanish had it mostly in South and Central America. And then we had it in the southern states. Slavery was legal in the colonies from New Hampshire to Georgia. And then one by one, the northern states sort of realized it. And George Washington freed his slaves. I mean, they all knew. He
kept a couple, somebody said. I don't know if that's true.
Thomas Jefferson understood. They understood that slavery was morally wrong.
Right.
And yet it was an impossible, what's the right word? It was they're making too much money not to give it up. And it's only later in the 19th century when the abolitionist movement comes, we should abolish slavery, that then you find slaveholders now making really big arguments about how, they're inferior, they're children, they can't handle freedom and all of this stuff, all of which they didn't really express. Thomas Jefferson did a little bit in his notes on the state of Virginia. It's very, very complicated, but we're always looking for a way to say that some people are more equal than others. And if you believe in equality, that's not the case.
Right.
That if you believe in the second line of the Declaration, which is our catechism, then it's everybody. And that people have the ability to rise according to their abilities and opportunities.
Yeah.
And you try to provide as many opportunities for as many people. But the minute you transform this civic, just explosion, this beautiful civic compact that we have, and racialize it, it can only be white, it can only be black, and it can only be this, it can only be that, it's already lost.
Yeah.
It is not one thing or one type of people. That's where you go wrong. I mean,
but history does that. It's kind of interesting because it's like, even whenever they were declaring America, right, and deciding what it meant to be American, and they were in this period that you investigated in the American Revolution documentary. It's like they were saying this is who we are, right? At the same time, they're also colonizing. It's interesting when colonization and being human started to sort of, I don't know, do you know what I'm kind of saying?
I know what you're talking.
It's just such a weird
it's the
dichotomy.
It's the difference between the ideal and the human possibility at any given moment. And what the founders were saying is that in order to have a government that operates, not only do all people have to be created equal, but you have to be pursuing this self-examination. We should be interested in improving ourselves. So when Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," he meant all white men of property free of debt. He did not mean a majority of the white population of the colonies, women. He did not mean the 500,000 free and enslaved African Americans. He did not mean the native peoples both intermixed with people and part of the rest of the continent. And remember, we didn't say when we started our Congress and when we started our army, we didn't say the Eastern Seaboard Congress. We didn't say the Eastern Seaboard Army. We said the Continental Congress, the Continental Army. We knew where we were going and we knew who we were going to run over to get it. And even when the Constitution was started, women were let out. There's one of the leading women of Philadelphia, Elizabeth Willing Powell, met Benjamin Franklin as he came out in mid-September in 1787 from Independence Hall, where they had been, figuring out the Constitution and getting it down, and said, "What have you created, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." Meaning, we're going to do this. Now, when they went into it in 1776, they were not after a democracy. Democracy meant mob rule to a lot of people. They were interested in an aristocracy of the elites, right? But in order to win the war, they had to enlist not the sturdy militiamen who often left to go plant a crop or often left to go harvest that crop, but they ended up with an army, the Continentals, the regular army of the United States of America, the Continental Army, were teenagers, second and third sons without a chance of an inheritance, felons, ne'er-do-wells, recent immigrants from Germany and England, and they won the war. Wow. And so as they're beginning, the dogs won the war, and as they're beginning, and we follow them, as you'll see, in this story, 14-year-old kid from Boston named John Greedon, 15-year-old kid, Joseph Plum Martin from Connecticut, a 10-year-old girl from Yorktown who's a refugee all of the war. You get to meet them. So it's not just George Washington and all of that stuff. But when they start trying to figure out their state constitutions, Pennsylvania says, well, why don't we give votes to every white man who's 21 or older, whether they're own property or not? And John Adams is like, wait, we're not going to, what about the aristocracy? Not the landed. So what happens is that democracy is not an object of our revolution. It's a consequence of it, which is okay. Because if you've got an unintended consequence of democracy, that's pretty good.
Pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
As our First Amendment says, the government will establish no religion. You have freedom of the press and freedom of assembly. You have the ability to, these are the hallmarks, the number one thing. After the Constitution was done, everybody said, whoa, time out. We've got a Constitution, we got an operating manual, but we're not going to go forward in this unless we get a Bill of Rights that tells us what, that enshrines the things we just fought for, things we just died for. There's one, the Saving Private Ryan story of, sons are dying. It's based on a true story where a woman, I think from Iowa, whose last name is Sullivan, lost 4 sons in a battleship that went down, and the Department of War said, we're now going to separate everybody, all the brothers. Rebecca Tanner, a Mohegan woman, meaning probably Connecticut, lost 5 sons, not 4, but 5 sons fighting for the patriot cause. This is a Native American woman. So you realize that's the sacrifice that people have made in order for us to be able to hold a demonstration, express our point of view nonviolently, and to be able to tolerate lots of ideas. I mean, you can't say, we're only going to tolerate our ideas and everybody else who doesn't agree with us are therefore bad. I mean, across the street from us on 23rd Street in New York City, where we are right now, is the headquarters of the Communist Party of the United States that has as much right to its office space as the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee. Huh. Doesn't it? In a country in which all ideas are free?
Is the head of the Communist Party?
The American Communist Party has its headquarters across the street. And they have had their headquarters there for decades and decades and decades.
Well, what's funny to me, Ken, is that it feels like just being a regular American that's hopeful, you're almost a communist these days in our own country.
Well,
that's, you know what I'm saying? That idea,